We are begging, if anyone knows anything, his friends, strangers, please call the hotline.
Well, the investigation into the death of Nolan Wells continues. NBC News is learning that the Mississippi State autopsy is now complete. Aaron Gilchrist has more on the new videos emerging from the day he disappeared.
Tonight, that state autopsy report now in the hands of investigators.
And Nolan did know how to swim. Confirmed that with his mother. He was very good shape, 6'1", 180 pounds, football player. But if he panicked, if he was, had a lot of sun that day, maybe he just wasn't 100%. If he did get sucked out into that ramp, it's possible that he drowned. And I don't think he went too far off because it wasn't too long when he washed up right back in the spot where he was last seen.
Listen, you're a dad. I'm a dad. We send our children out, and first of all, regardless of what ethnicity, regardless of what color we're talking about here, we send our children out, and you're the only one that doesn't come home alive. I'll be damned if the Chris Cuomo that I know doesn't want answers and doesn't expect answers. You know me, and I'm going to push for answers. So for no one to have answers as to what happens is when the suspicion elevates exponentially.
Obviously, we mentioned that there are a lot of questions sort of surrounding this entire situation. So for you guys, what have been some of the biggest questions, some of the most even, now unanswered questions, and how have the questions changed since when you guys got into this around the 4th of July versus where we are today?
Yeah, the biggest question for me is that the last, or as far as eyewitnesses that I've spoken to, the last set of eyes that were on Nolan were approximately 4 o'clock on July 4th. Sometime after that, there seems to be kind of a black hole where nobody can see or account for him. Obviously, he went into the water at some point. We don't know when, and did not come out alive. And he was discovered on Monday morning, almost about a day and a half later. So obviously, there's some questions there.
This loss, this grief, this pain, it's different.
His phone ended up at a place that was not his home. His keys were missing, and the people he had gone out with came back without him. That alone should make you stop. Not because it solves the case, but because it creates the one question nobody has fully answered. Not investigators, not the people who were with him, not even the family still chasing the truth. How does an 18-year-old get left on an island off the Gulf Coast without his phone, without his keys, and without anyone around him sounding the alarm until much later? Nolan Wells went to Horn Island on the 4th of July, the way countless young people spend that holiday, on a boat, with friends, heading toward sun, water, and a long summer afternoon. He never returned. And the stretch of time between when his friends say they last saw him and when his body was recovered from the water has become one of the most painful, disputed, and unanswered timelines in recent memory. What sets this case apart is not internet rumor or anonymous speculation. It is the people closest to Nolan, the ones who knew him, grew up with him, and understood how he moved through life, saying out loud that the accepted version does not fit the person they knew, and they are not hiding behind fake names. They are attaching their identities to what they believe. Tonight on Unsolved Files, we are going through this case piece by piece. The medical questions that remain behind closed doors, the accounts that do not line up cleanly, and the public words of the one person who may have understood Nolan better than almost anyone else. What he said on camera changes the way this story feels. Before we go further, this case involves the death of a teenager, and includes details many viewers may find deeply disturbing. The forensic issues, the circumstances of Nolan's final hours, and the statements from the people who loved him are handled carefully here, but honestly, viewer discretion is advised. If you are new to Unsolved Files, this is what we do. No chaos, no agenda. Just confirmed information, named sources, and the questions that still refuse to go away. Subscribe now so you do not miss the next update, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. We have people here from all over the world, and we want to hear from you. Now let's get into it. Horn Island is not somewhere you casually wander into. It sits about 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, a federally protected barrier island with no shelters, no bathrooms, and no cell service. You get there by boat, and once you are out there, you are largely on your own. That isolation is part of the attraction. Every 4th of July, crowds gather there. The 4th of July 2026 was no exception. The boat carrying Nolan and his group reached Horn Island shortly after 11 in the morning. The people on that vessel included Trayson Shepard, Warren Hudson, Wyatt Pyran, Jack Spatalo, Morgan Seymour, and Eric Alcantara. Nolan was the only black teenager in that group. Javen Williams, Nolan's closest friend, was supposed to be on that same boat, but he did not get on. It filled before he could board, so he found another ride and arrived separately. He saw Nolan on the island that day. That matters, and we will come back to it. When they first got there, it was manageable. Their group, a few others, nothing unusual. But Horn Island on the 4th builds quickly. Warren Hudson later described it in an interview with Brandon Tatum on the Officer Tatum Show. First it was just their circle. Then it grew to around 50 people. Then it kept swelling. By the afternoon, there were reportedly somewhere between 300 and 400 people on and around the island. Boats were packed together offshore. Alcohol was flowing. By Hudson's own description, it had turned into a major party. That afternoon is where the timeline becomes critical. Around 3 in the afternoon, multiple accounts still placed Nolan on the island and accounted for. That is the last confirmed point, where the friend group says they had eyes on him. Ashley Cole, a local chancery judge and Warren Hudson's mother, confirmed that her son last saw Nolan around that time. Cole also said the boat left Horn Island at roughly 4:30 in the afternoon. What happened between 3 in the afternoon and that departure remains the center of this entire case. Before we get into the competing stories about Nolan's last hours, it is important to ground this in what the physical record actually shows, because GPS does not bend to memory. CBS News obtained location data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources tracking the boat that brought Nolan to the island. According to those records, the vessel left Horn Island and returned to its original dock. It then moved into Fort Bayou at 5:52 in the evening, went back to the dock at 6:06 in the evening, and made one final movement toward the Fort Bayou boat launch at 7:19 that night. That data supports the departure timeline. It matches what Cole and others said about when the boat pulled away. What it does not tell us is who was actually on board when it left. It does not tell us whether Nolan deliberately stayed behind, or whether something else prevented him from getting back on. GPS can follow a boat. It cannot follow a person. And Nolan Wells did not come back to the mainland. The people who were with Nolan that day have not stayed quiet. Several members of that group have publicly explained what they say happened during those final hours on Horn Island. Before anything else is layered onto this case, those statements deserve to be heard clearly. Trayson Shepard was one of the first to speak publicly. In interviews with ABC News and Good Morning America, he described the afternoon in detail. According to Shepard, Nolan met a girl on the island that day and liked her. Shepard's account was that when it was time for the boat to leave, Nolan made a spontaneous choice to stay behind. He framed it as a young person's holiday decision, impulsive, casual, and voluntary. Shepard was clear that, in his telling, nobody forced Nolan to stay, and nobody rushed him into it. He also said he gave investigators the same account, and that everyone in the group cooperated with law enforcement from the start. Shepard also addressed a separate issue that had spread quickly online, a video many people claimed showed a confrontation involving Nolan. Shepard said on the record that the voice in that footage is his, not Nolan's. According to him, the altercation captured there involved him and another man over an issue related to Shepard's girlfriend. Nolan was nearby, but he was not part of that confrontation, and does not appear in the clip. Rolling Stone later reported that Shepard's version of that incident was backed up by both his girlfriend and his uncle, who were also on the island that day. Speaking to CNN, Javen Williams separately said the voice in that video sounded like Shepard's to him as well, though he added that from the footage alone he could not say whether the figure shown was Nolan. Warren Hudson gave his own version in a separate interview with Brandon Tatum. Hudson was not on Nolan's boat. He was on another vessel nearby, but he was there that afternoon, and he described the situation around the departure as urgent. The bilge pump on Nolan's boat was failing. Water was coming in. They needed to move. Hudson said Nolan was not abandoned without warning. According to him, they told Nolan to get back on the boat, and Nolan said no. In Hudson's telling, Nolan wanted to remain on the island with the girl. Hudson also added another important detail. He said someone later told him they saw Nolan still on Horn Island, as late as 6 in the evening, well after the boat carrying his group had already left. He further said there were still plenty of boats around the island at that time, and that his group was far from the last one there. More context surfaced in a publicly shared screenshot attributed to Ashley Cole. In that message, Wyatt Pyron was described as repeatedly urging Nolan to board the boat at 5 in the evening. Nolan, according to that account, wanted to stay with a girl whose boat was nearby. Wyatt's boat then started taking on water, and was eventually towed. That version has now been repeated across multiple interviews by multiple people over multiple weeks. That level of consistency matters. It should not be dismissed. But it is only one side of this case. What comes next shifts the entire story. Subscribe to Unsolved Files now, because the person you are about to hear from knew Nolan Wells longer than almost anyone else in this case, and what he said publicly cannot be brushed aside. Every account of Nolan's final hours points back to one person he spent time with that afternoon. She has been mentioned in nearly every public retelling from the friend group. According to several of those accounts, she is the reason Nolan stayed behind when the boat left. Her name is Katie McCormack. She is 19 years old, from a town east of Ocean Springs. She was not part of Nolan's group. She came to Horn Island with her own friends, and had no known connection to what would happen later, beyond crossing paths with Nolan that day. Katie has not spoken publicly. She has not sat for interviews. No public accusation of wrongdoing has been made against her. That needs to be said plainly, because her name has circulated widely online without that context. The person who did speak publicly was her sister, Gracie McCormack. In comments to the Daily Mail, Gracie gave the clearest account available of Katie's experience that day. According to Gracie, Katie spent time with Nolan on the island, but when it came time for people to head back to the mainland, Katie believed Nolan would be getting on the same boat he had arrived on. From her point of view, the people around him telling him it was time to go would not have left without him. She had no reason to think he would end up stranded. Katie did not leave with Nolan's group. She returned separately with her brother and his fiancée. Gracie also said, the McCormack family has cooperated fully both with investigators and with Nolan's family, and has provided whatever information they could. What Katie did not know when she left Horn Island was that Nolan was still there. By the time people realized he was missing, hours had already slipped by. For weeks, the friend group's story held. Different people, different interviews. One consistent explanation. But consistency only matters if the foundation beneath it is solid. And that foundation, the claim that Nolan willingly stayed behind, was challenged by the one person whose understanding of Nolan came from a lifetime, not a single afternoon. Javen Williams sat down with CNN anchor Laura Coates and spoke publicly, with his name attached, about what he believed happened on Horn Island. Javen was not an outsider pulling theories from screenshots. He was there that day. He saw Nolan on the island. He had known him his whole life, and what he told Laura Coates did not line up with what the friend group had been saying. His view was direct. He does not believe Nolan would have told the people he arrived with to leave without him. Not because he had a gut feeling, not because he was grieving, because he had watched Nolan for years and said there had never been an exception to the pattern. If Nolan rode somewhere with you, he came back with you. According to Javen, that was not occasional behavior. That was simply who Nolan was every time. That kind of statement carries a different kind of weight. It is not vague. It points to a consistent pattern that either existed or did not. And Javen was not the only person who would later raise that same doubt. He also focused on the phone. Javen said he could not imagine Nolan choosing to stay on a remote island without at least making sure he had his phone before the boat left. That issue sits at the center of one of the most unresolved parts of this entire case. How Nolan ended up on Horn Island without his phone and without his keys. Javen did not claim to know the answer. What he said was that it did not match the Nolan he knew. That distinction matters. Javen was not present for the exact moment the boat departed. He did not personally hear the conversation between Nolan and the others in those final minutes. He is not offering eyewitness testimony about the departure itself. What he is offering is something different. A character-based contradiction built on years of first-hand familiarity. That is meaningful, even if it is not the same as seeing the moment happen. There was one more thing Javen said publicly that deserves to be recognized. He stated on the record that he does not believe race is at the center of what happened in this case. He offered that view voluntarily, fully aware of how emotionally charged the public discussion had become. He was not trying to please anyone. He simply said what he believed. That kind of honesty, especially inside a case this loud, matters. Javen Williams spoke as a best friend, someone who grew up beside Nolan, rode with him, and watched the habits of his life over years. His doubt about the accepted account came from that place. Personal, specific, grounded in experience. And then Nolan's father publicly arrived at much the same doubt on his own. Elmore Wanley Sr. has said openly that the family cannot understand why Nolan would have separated from the people he came with. He made it clear that this was not vague parental instinct. It was tied to a rule he had taught Nolan for years, especially when Nolan started going to parties farther from home after beginning college. The lesson was simple. If you go with 5, you come back with 5. Do not split from your group. Safety is in numbers. Elmore said Nolan always understood that. Always answered, yes sir. It was not a new rule, and it was not one Nolan had been known to ignore. Elmore also pointed to something else from the night Nolan disappeared. The first call Christine received did not come from Nolan. It came from someone else. Nolan never called, never texted. On a night when he would have needed a way back from a remote island with no cell service, there was no communication from him at all. To his father, that did not feel normal. The timing matters too. Nolan was not headed into some aimless stretch of summer. He was just days away from reporting back to Southwest Mississippi Community College for football camp. He had spent the summer training. He understood, as his father put it, that football at that level was business as much as sport. That is the version of Nolan Elmore described: disciplined, responsible, and not the kind of person to casually break away from the group he came with. Two people. Two entirely different relationships to Nolan. The same doubt. That is not nothing. While the public argument over Horn Island was growing louder, something quieter was unfolding that same night. A string of calls, location pings, and a long wait outside a dark house that created a different set of questions. It began when Christine Wanley reached out to Tashima Hance, Javen's mother. Nolan had not been heard from. Christine was trying to locate him and started calling through the people she could reach. Tashima began making calls of her own. The first person she spoke to was another young man named Javen, not Javen Williams. Javen had been with his girlfriend that evening, and had already spoken earlier with Javen. He said he had not seen Nolan since the island. That was the last he knew. Tashima then called Jalen. No answer. After that she called Lion Broomfield, another friend from the wider group, and he picked up. Jalen was nearby, and Lian put him on the phone. Jalen also said he had not heard from Nolan. At that point, the question became less where is Nolan, and more where is Nolan's phone. Two separate tracking tools were reportedly showing two different locations at the same time. Christine's own tracker pointed one way. Nolan's Snapchat location pointed somewhere else. Same phone. Two different places. On the same night his mother was trying to find him. Tashima went to the place shown on Snapchat. When she arrived, the house was dark. Several teenagers were inside. She asked for Nolan's phone. It took about 15 minutes before it was returned. During that wait, there was confusion over who actually had it. At one point she was told it was inside Wyatt Pyron's truck. Then someone said a girl would bring it out. Eventually the phone was returned, but the delay and the shifting explanation have remained part of the case. Then another discrepancy appeared. Christine Wanley later publicly stated that Nolan's phone had been found on the boat, not recovered from a house. Those are two on-record accounts pointing to two different places for the same phone. That contradiction has not been publicly resolved. What both versions do point to is the deeper question underneath them. Nolan Wells either left Horn Island or was left there without his phone and without his keys. No one has offered a clean explanation for how that happened. What comes next is where the medical record enters the case, and instead of closing questions, it opened more. Subscribe to Unsolved Files and turn on notifications, because when this case moves again, you will want to know immediately. 2 days after Nolan Wells was last seen on Horn Island, a National Park Service ranger found his body in the water near the shoreline on the morning of July 6th. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind responded and made an initial assessment. At that stage, he said there were no immediately obvious signs of trauma or foul play visible on the body. Given the circumstances, a young man last seen on a remote island surrounded by water, Lind requested a full autopsy through the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office to determine whether deeper signs of injury or foul play were present. That state autopsy has been completed. Its findings have not been made public. They remain sealed and are expected to be presented to a grand jury as part of the standard process for suspicious or unnatural deaths in Jackson County. The family did not want to rely only on the state's timeline. On July 10th, civil rights attorney Ben Crump appeared alongside Al Sharpton and Nolan's parents, Elmore Wanley Sr. and Christine Wells Wanley, at a press conference held at the National Action Network headquarters in New York. Crump announced that the family had commissioned an independent autopsy. Their position was clear. The story they had been given about their son's death was not making sense to them, and they wanted answers from an examiner they chose themselves. That second examination was funded by Colin Kaepernick and carried out in Washington, D.C. On July 22nd, at the NOC National Convention in Chicago, Ben Crump stood beside Nolan's parents and announced the result. The finding was undetermined pending investigation. The pathologist who performed that exam noted several serious limitations. One of them was especially significant. When the independent examiner received Nolan's body, the lungs were not included. Neither was the throat tissue. The original autopsy photographs from the state examination were also not provided. Retaining the lungs can be standard in a possible drowning case, since lung findings may help determine whether water entered the airways. But the throat and neck tissue were also absent, and no public explanation has been given for that specific retention. Nancy Grace later discussed those findings during a televised appearance with Fox News host Griff Jenkins. She focused on one particular detail from the independent report: a deep red discoloration beneath the skin on the back of Nolan's skull near the occipital bone. Grace pointed out that this did not sound like typical post-mortem lividity, where blood settles in the lowest part of the body after death. This was described as isolated to one area. She was careful not to overstate what it meant. She mentioned possible accidental explanations, including contact with a boat in the water, and said plainly that she did not know what caused it. But she also said she would keep asking until there was an explanation. The missing throat and neck tissue troubled her for a separate reason. She questioned what may have been found in that region during the original exam that led to it being retained apart from the rest of the body. Forensic pathologist Dr. Carl Wigren, speaking separately to CNN and not tied to the case itself, added broader context. He explained that drowning is among the hardest conclusions to make in forensic pathology, because no single sign proves it on its own. Examiners look for patterns and indicators, including fluid in the airways and changes to the skin of the hands. He also noted that an autopsy cannot always determine whether someone was conscious or unconscious before entering the water. Ben Crump separately challenged the idea of a simple accidental drowning, pointing to Nolan's athletic ability and swimming background as reasons he found that explanation difficult to accept without more evidence. NACA President Derek Johnson publicly echoed that skepticism, saying he did not believe Nolan's death was accidental. So that is where the medical side stood. 2 autopsies, one sealed, one inconclusive, and more questions than closure. This case did not stay local to Mississippi. It spread quickly across the country, and as it did, it picked up meaning far beyond the facts on the ground. To cover it honestly, that wider context has to be addressed directly: who said what has actually been documented, and where the line sits between verified fact and public projection. The starting point is simple. Nolan Wells was the only black teenager in his group on Horn Island that day. The crowd itself was largely white, and this happened in Mississippi, a place whose racial history is neither distant nor abstract. That context is part of why the case drew national attention so fast. Ben Crump and the Wells family have been clear about where their concern regarding race is focused. Their public position has not been that race explains what happened to Nolan on the island. Their concern has centered on how the investigation has been handled, how quickly it moved, what information has been shared, and whether the urgency would feel the same under different circumstances. That distinction matters, even if it has often been blurred online. Not everyone close to the case has framed it that way. Javen Williams, who knew Nolan as well as almost anyone, said on the record that he does not believe race is central to what happened. He offered that view knowing exactly how intense the public conversation had become. He was not denying the broader history. He was simply giving his own reading of this specific case. That position exists alongside Derek Johnson's public doubt that Nolan's death was accidental. 2 invested people. 2 different interpretations. Jackson County NOC President Curly Clark and Nolan's grandfather, Christopher Wells Sr., also publicly condemned the spread of unverified rumors online. Their call for accuracy did not conflict with their demand for a full and transparent investigation. They wanted both. What unfolded online went beyond disagreement. The FBI has confirmed it is investigating threats made against people connected to the case. A man from Sacramento, California, was indicted by a federal grand jury and arrested on July 30th for sending threatening Facebook messages aimed at people involved in the case. The next day, a woman from Ohio was also arrested on similar charges. Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, and Morgan Seymour launched a Give Send Go fundraiser to defend themselves against possible lawsuits and to pursue slander and libel claims against those they say spread false accusations about them. By August 3rd, that fundraiser had reportedly passed $90,000. Christine Wanley received hate mail. Ashley Cole and her son deleted their social media accounts because of the volume of threats directed at them. A false AI-generated video portraying Christine also circulated online, and Christine had to publicly debunk it herself. That became part of the case too, an active investigation still lacking answers, wrapped in so much noise that finding those answers became harder for everyone. So where did things actually stand as of August 2026? Not where the internet wanted them to stand. Not where either side of the public argument was trying to drag them. Where the verified facts placed them. The state autopsy done by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office was complete, but its results remained sealed and were expected to go before a grand jury. That grand jury had not yet convened. Until it does, the official medical findings are not available to the public, to the family, or to anyone outside the process. The independent autopsy returned a finding of undetermined pending investigation. Toxicology results had not been publicly released. No authority had publicly explained the missing throat and neck tissue. The contradiction between the 2 on-record stories about where Nolan's phone was recovered had not been cleared up. As of August 2, 2026, authorities had publicly stated that they did not suspect foul play in Nolan's death. That was the official position at that point. But official positions in active cases are not the same as final conclusions, especially when a sealed autopsy and a pending grand jury still hang over the investigation. This case was not closed. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has confirmed that the investigation remains active. His office made a specific public request for anyone who was on Horn Island on July 4th and has original, unedited photos or video, particularly footage showing any altercations or believed to include Nolan Wells, to come forward. That request is still open. Ben Crump's team and investigators with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office also agreed to a mutual inspection of Nolan's phone. No public findings from that review had been released. Beyond the active investigation, one thing remained especially hard to ignore. The 2 people who knew Nolan most closely, his lifelong best friend Javen Williams and his father Elmore Wanley Sr., both said independently that the accepted version of events does not match the person they knew. Neither of them witnessed the exact moment in question. Neither claims direct eyewitness proof of what happened in those last minutes. What they do offer is a contradiction, built on years of knowing Nolan's habits, his choices, and the way he lived. And no one has fully explained that away. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. The night before he left, he made salmon for his family. He was 4 days away from reporting back for football camp. He never came home. There is no verdict here. No ending, no clean answer. There is a family still waiting, and an investigation still moving. And when it moves again, unsolved files will be here, with the same standard applied to every part of this story. No chaos. No agenda. Just the verified facts and the real questions still hanging in the air. If this case matters to you, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, so you are first to know when something changes. And leave a comment below telling us which question in this case you most want answered. We read every single one.